Live? All right, welcome everybody. This is week 4 of Fingerstyle Foundations. I'm Jim Deeming with jamplay.com, and I hope you have your guitars in hand and are ready to work with me. This is not Jim TV, this is a guitar lesson, and I hope you'll work on this stuff as we go along, and then you'll have tablature and supplemental content to work throughout the week on your homework, and there will be homework. This week we're going to talk about palm muting, and there's more to this and less than this maybe than you might guess. Traditionally when people talk about palm muting, they're thinking of the right hand, and what we're doing in essence is we're taking an open ringing chord or notes that have a lot of what we call sustain. That's how long the strings are ringing, and it's nice to change that up a little bit to go from a ringing open sound to a little bit more punchy muted sound. And people usually think of doing that with the palm on the picking hand. That's why it's called palm muting. I'm going to cover that, but then I'm also going to briefly touch on a lesser well-known but equally important muting technique that happens on your left hand. I'll show you that a little bit later. Up till now, we've been working on getting our thumbs going, starting with that root note. First thing your thumb does is plays that root note on the downbeat of a chord at the beginning of a measure, or usually when you make a chord change. Typically you'll start, when you've transitioned to a new chord, you'll also lead off with that root note of the new chord. Hopefully you've been working on that. Last week we started working on some single note playing underneath the chords, working on a little bit of scales, simulating melody notes, but trying to hold the chord shape. Now what we're going to do is take everything we've done so far and try to make it sound just a little bit more interesting. Palm muting is not something you'll do all the time. Think of this as a little knob that you have control over as you work your way through a song, through an arrangement, that you can change things up with a very subtle, simple movement of your right hand to change the voice of the guitar, if you will. And so we're gonna start out exploring this by looking at a simple chord progression, and I'll break down the technique for you. The first phase of this technique that we're going to look at is we're going to attempt to mute only the bottom 3 or maybe the bottom 4 strings, and that's typically where our thumb is playing. We're going to, for now, leave the notes that your fingers are playing, the higher strings, we're going to leave those open. We're not going to try to mute those just yet. So the way this works is with your right hand in picking position. Normally up till now your palm has been up in the air, so to speak, not touching anything. And while keeping your fingers in picking position, both your thumb and your fingers, you're going to lay down your wrist against the surface of the guitar a little bit until your palm starts to make contact with the strings. You can see where I'm doing it, my palm is touching the strings pretty close to the saddle, okay? Now this is a knob that you have control over. You can do it back here where I am, and here's what it sounds like. Here's open, and here's with a slight mute back at the saddle. You can still hear the tone of each of those notes right now. So you can hear that's a G note, but I'm killing the sustain with just a light palm pressure on those strings. I'm using what some people call the blade edge of your palm here, resting it down. Now if you're playing with a thumb pick, this is going to be pretty easy to reach, because as we talked about before, with the thumb pick, my normal picking position is with the thumb running parallel to the strings, meaning that my wrist is already down here pretty close to where it needs to be. If you're playing without a thumb pick, you're probably playing a little bit higher up off the strings. Your wrist is a little bit higher because your thumb needs to dig in that corner, a little bit of a nail. To get this palm muting though, you are going to have to lay down a little bit, and that may roll you over a little more to the side of the thumb. For me, that's a little uncomfortable because I haven't developed any kind of a callus over there, and it's more tender there. Probably will be for you too if this is new. So just expect that that's something that you're going to have to ease into a little bit at a time until your callus develops on the side of your thumb. So again, palm up is open strings. Starting to rest that palm down on the strings begins to mute it a little bit. You'll be surprised how much difference this makes to the sound of anything that you're playing when you do this. So we'll call that level 1 on your knob that you can adjust. To make that palm muting more aggressive, you can move your hand a little bit, I'll call this forward, closer to the sound hole of the guitar. What that's done is it's moved my palm farther up off of the saddle and more out here into the strings. And if you go too far, that muting gets really aggressive and you almost start to lose, well, eventually you do lose the tone of the note that you're playing. There may be a time where that's what you want. Then you've just got a little kick drum down there, right? Popping those strings. So this is a variation that you can play with and experiment over time. As your palm moves forward toward the sound hole, it gets more and more aggressive. The other knob that you have to control that is probably pretty obvious, and that is how hard you push down on those strings in any of those positions will amplify the muting effect. So even if I'm back here by the saddle, really close to this, just lightly touching it, barely muted, without moving, I can start to push in a little harder, more muting there too. So it's a two-dimensional control you have over how much muting that you have, all the way up until it's just popping noises, okay? And the same is true with or without a thumb pick, but your thumb is there's less of an attack with just a bare thumb than there is with a thumb pick, but you still have the same effect at your disposal. What I've come up with for an exercise for you to work on this is a real simple chord progression. It's in the key of C, and I'm going to run you through the C chord. Then we're going to go to A minor, which, if you'd like a little teardrop of music theory here, A minor is what we call the relative minor of the key of C. And then we're going to go to that bad old F chord, and then the G chord. You've probably heard this progression somewhere. You've done that on the piano, I'll bet. So those are the chords, the 4 chords that we're going to work with, and we're going to get our thumb going in the same patterns that we've already done on the thumb. And this works whether you're doing the 2-string thumb pattern back and forth on the same 2 notes, or whether you're doing the Chet pattern with 3 strings. Either one is fine. Practice whatever one you're most comfortable with for this exercise, because right now we want to focus on our sound, okay, more than worrying about trying a new complicated pattern. Now, while we've got this thumb pattern going, for the exercise that you see on the tab there, what I'm doing is on every other beat, on beats 2 and 4, we're adding a couple of fingers to whatever chord we're playing on. So in that first measure, our fingers are going to be playing the 2nd and 3rd string on those in-between beats, on the beats 2 and 4, but our thumb is going to keep going. So what we're actually going to have on that 2nd and 4th beat, we're going to start out with the thumb, then the thumb's going to play again on the alternate string while we pick that chord. So you could think of it in terms of your right hand, you could think of it as a thumb and then a pinch. It's a pinch because at the same time the thumb is playing down, the fingers are picking up. Okay, so hopefully you'll find this to be a pretty simple pattern to work through. On the A minor chord, the thumb pattern is the same because the root note is still on the same string, so thumb pattern is the same, and we're using the same 2 strings with our fingers. Alright, so this is all we're playing. Now on our F and G chords, the root note moves to the 6th string, so your thumb pattern changes here, but we're still going to use the fingers on strings 2 and 3 just to keep it simple. And then when we go to the G chord, thumb pattern is the same, and same 2 fingers. So here it is again. Our chords are C, minor, and then to the F, and then to the G. Only now, while we're doing exactly that, we're going to gently lay down the heel of our palm on the bottom 3 strings, and you may find that that does make a little contact with more than you intended. That's okay. You're going to learn to control that as you go along, but I want you right now to just get the feel of and the sound of this. You hear the difference? Especially on those open strings, like when we have a root note on the 5th string for our A minor chord, that thing will ring forever if we don't mute it. So now we've got this. And then onto the F chord, still muted. When we go to the G chord, maybe you want to experiment with moving your palm a little bit and see what happens. Okay, I'll work through this with you again. I just want you to get the idea of the exercise here, okay? So again, right hand, we really hope that your right hand is not having to make a big adjustment here between muting and non-muting, because as I said earlier, this may be a technique that you want to turn on and off in, maybe you play a verse with no muting, and then to make it more interesting, the next time you play that verse, you put palm muting on it to make it feel a little different. It makes your arrangement more interesting. But you may even split hairs more than that. You might be in the middle and then change it right before a chord change, or just change it during a different phrase of the melody. There's endless possibilities for when and how much you use this technique. So let's start to get the feel of it. I'll go through the chord progression with you. I'll slow it down a little bit. Also, just so you know, I'm not going to have Chris switch the tablature page with you. The only thing you're missing on page 2 is a repeat of line 1 that you already see there. You come back to the C chord and repeat the same thing. So when you're practicing this at home, maybe you just want to loop this over and over again through those same 4 chords without stopping, and then watch your palm, feel your way through this, and get a sound that you like. Let's try this. We'll go through this one time really slow. C, A minor, F, and G. And then back to C. 1, 2, ready, go. That's all there is to it so far. Okay? Now, if you want, as a next level of palm muting, you can extend this down. You heard where before I was trying to only mute the bass notes and then let these ring clear. You may also want to mute all of them that you're playing to get a really dry, punchy sound, and that would sound like this. And all I'm doing now is I'm rolling down just a little bit more palm contact with these strings that I'm picking with my fingers, and then it sounds like this. That B string's still ringing a little bit. You may find that if you really need to kill it, you might have to roll your palm down a little bit to knock that B note. But we've got another way to solve that coming up. I don't do that very often. When you're strumming, you might. If you're familiar with strumming and using a flat pick, it's the same idea. You can roll through all those strings open, or you can have your palm follow your pick down and mute everything. Same idea, okay? But now we're picking over the top of the muting. That's the only difference, okay? Now, before we take questions, I'm going to add one more technique for you. And when people say palm muting and they're automatically thinking about their right hand. They forget about the left hand. And let me just show you something down here. I'm going to pick a chord. How about an A minor chord? I'm fretting 3 notes with my left hand. That means that 3 strings are played open. We can cause a muting effect with our left hand by picking those notes, those fretted notes, and then releasing, but not completely coming off of the string. If you just touch those strings on your A minor chord, you get that sound. So all we're doing is we're starting with this and then relaxing. And it has the same muting effect. Another way to mute, you would think, okay, well, that's fine for the 3 strings that I'm fretting, and most of our first position chords, you're only fretting 3 strings, right? So what about those others? Well, the low ones we got covered with the palm, but another technique is to use this available finger here, and that might seem like a lot of work, but you can. Here's a G chord example. All I did here is laid down all my fingers, kill it, and you can experiment with that. Doesn't work so much for the 6th string here laying down. Maybe that's enough. Use that pinky to kill it. And the timing of this is another tuning knob that you have. You can strum all the way through and then mute it. You can kill it right away, right after your strum or you're picking. But just understand that you have the ability to mute both with your left and your right hand. And if you were to dissect a video of me playing a song and could really watch closely, you would see that I'm nearly always doing a combination of the two. This is pretty obvious. That's just the thumb, palm muting on the right hand. But when I want to pop these, I'll get it that way, or lay down, or as you know, it varies depending on what strings you need to mute that your palm isn't getting taken care of. Okay, so you can use both of those techniques. And I gave you that one drill. You can extrapolate that idea then and go through and practice your other chord progressions. And one more thought on this. You remember what we did last week? This exercise. When I come back down, I'll do the palm muting. Now, when these are melody notes, I really don't want to mute those. So that'll be a good exercise to do as well, because especially on that 3rd string, you'll find out, am I muting too far and killing my melody note? You usually don't want to do that, at least not at first. Also, the alternating finger patterns that we did in week 2, was it? Practice those. Same idea. Learn to split as best you possibly can with your palm. Separate the upper and the lower strings. And you're going to ask, what about that D chord? When my pattern moves down to the 4th and 3rd string, your mute also then needs to move down too. There, I fixed it. See, I'm getting a little bit of a mute now on that 3rd string. Essentially, the idea for this technique is whatever notes your thumb is picking, those are the ones that you want to mute, okay? Let's stop here and take questions and see how you're doing with this new material.
Okay, Jim, we have a quick one here
Okay.
from Rocker Family. Wondering on the G chord if you're muting the D string as well.
Yes. So the question is, are we muting? So our thumb is playing a 3-string pattern, or maybe just the 2-string pattern. Yes, you would be muting, basically, like I just said. Probably should have said it sooner. The simple rule is whatever my thumb is playing over here, those are the ones that I want muted, so that I have a consistent, I was going to say consistent mutation. That's not really what we're looking for. A consistent mute on anything that you do with the thumb. Okay, so yes, in that case, in the G chord. Just like that. Okay, thumb pick notes, get the mute down here. Any others?
I have one more here from Chubb. Wondering about strumming with the thumb pick. You mentioned strumming with this thumb pick. In this case, are you rotating the finger?
Yeah, sure. For strumming, just because, and I think you're talking about rotating my thumb possibly when I'm strumming down. I'm rotating that thumb. I'm exaggerating that rotation. Instead of picking straight in, I'm laying it down. 2 reasons. One is because the thumb pick makes a ferociously thick flat pick, okay? It doesn't give very easily, so if I don't turn that down a little bit, it'll hang up in there unless I really want a loud strum. If I want maximum volume, sure, I'll hold it straight up and down. But the other thing it does when I roll my thumb over like that, look what it does to my palm. It helps my palm roll down and mute all 6 strings. My palm is kind of rounded here, right? The saddle is flat. So as I'm strumming through it, by rolling down that thumb, it makes the strum smoother and easier to do, but it also sets up my palm nicer for muting all 6 strings. So that's the reason for that on a strumming technique.
Okay, and we've got another one here. This is more of a general question from R. Washko. Do you ever shave the tips of your pick?
I personally do not. These picks that I get, I happen to be very happy with how they come from the factory. But there's not a problem at all with reshaping your picks to whatever you want. You may want to change the shape of what I call the paddle here, the part that actually plays the outside dimensions of it. Maybe you want to skinny it up. You may want it shorter. You can't make it any longer, but if this was too deep for you to be comfortable with, you can certainly file it down. Lots of players do that. I just happen to like the way these come and leave them alone, but nothing wrong with that. Are we caught up on the questions? Nope. Here comes another.
We've got one more here. Let me
Okay.
get it in the system here. And this one is from BD Seagull. Not really a question, but more probably a wondering. The thumb note is muted, but I don't hear the upper chord ringing out.
So maybe you're not hearing it because there's 2 possibilities I can think of. One is that your muting is just going down too far. And so you kind of got to take advantage of that fact that your palm is a little rounded there at the heel. And that's part of the learning process here is how much are you rolling that palm down, and you want to keep it up high enough that it stays off of your picked notes. Maybe just for fun, get your palm down and then without moving, pick that G string and B string and see if you've got it clear, and then experiment with your palm rotation until those are ringing clear, but you've still got the mute where you want it. To really split hairs here, ideally you have the thumb or excuse me, the palm only muting the strings as you're playing with the thumb, and leaving these three, the upper three, open. The other thing that may be happening here, though, too, I suppose, is if this is a new right hand position and a new feel for you, you might be so focused on the palm muting that your fingers are saying, hey, this isn't the angle we were at before, and they feel a little weaker maybe on the picking. So make sure that you're picking them strong enough to ring out while your brain is focused on this. And I'll go ahead and tee off of that and kind of make another comment, because it almost always comes up. I've got this big old thick thumb pick on my thumb, and it pops those notes really loud. My fingers, even with nails, if I'm not used to doing this, sometimes it seems like these are weaker than the thumb. And that's just another part of the whole learning process, is learning to balance how much of this you want and how loud this needs to be. If it seems to you like you can't hear those melody notes, you're going to have to put some focus on digging in a little more with your fingers and or easing up with your thumb. You can develop quite a range of attack with your thumb. I think in week 1 or 2 I mentioned that depending on how far into the sound hole you dig with that thumb pick, the farther in you go, the more you're going to pop that string, the louder it's going to be. But you can also develop a touch where you're just barely digging into that string and soften it up a lot. You have that volume knob right here. It's all in control of how much your thumb digs in. Your volume knob on your fingers might be I call it dig in. When I mentioned before that when I pick strings with my fingers, I make contact with the skin first and then sweep through it, follow through it with the nail. But you can dig in a little harder, still contacting with the skin, but dig in a little bit more and stiffen your fingers up and pull harder. And you can turn the volume up either here or here by learning to control that. So that's going to be part of this process too.
Yes, there is another question, Jim. Let's get it up on the screen here. This one is also from Chubb. He had a follow-up question to the strumming with the thumb pick, wondering about strumming up. I think maybe if you could expand on that just a little bit.
Okay. That's a good question. We're not super focused on strumming. I was trying to give an example there, but in the case of an upstrum, and maybe you're asking about upstrumming with a thumb pick, exactly what I did for the downstroke, rolling that thumb pick down a little bit. I gotta turn that back around before I come up through an upstroke. Otherwise, I'm gonna dig in and probably hang up on the strings on the upstroke. So angle down for a downstroke, angle up for an upstroke. Now, as far as muting on an upstroke, that's when I really rely on left-hand muting, because it's pretty hard to rotate that up and mute. My palm just doesn't get that, right? But whenever you're doing an upstroke, usually upstrokes happen, if I can throw a little music theory at you, a simple strumming pattern with downstrokes, maybe these are on your 1 beats. These are quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Upstrokes almost always happen on 1/8 notes, those faster ones that happen in between the quarter notes. So in that case, if I'm wanting to mute, it's usually sufficient to mute on that stronger downbeat, which is where we want it anyway. And as you come through the upstroke, if there's a little bit of a ring, that's fine, because I'm going to kill it again on the next downstroke. But I do have, especially with a thumb pick, I've got to roll that thumb up on the upstroke to make it work. Okay?
And one more, get kind of closer back on track here. This is from Hurricane 212. How does the palm muting change when you don't use a thumb pick?
The palm muting doesn't change itself. The technique of laying that palm down to reduce the sustain of the strings doesn't change. The thing that's different between having a thumb pick or not, as I mentioned, is just you typically have a softer attack, right? Because it's your skin of your thumb. Now, if you're really digging in with your nail and have a nail long enough to do that, you can get more punch, but you're going to have to learn to keep that thumb angle and still get the palm down. I find that a little bit difficult to do just because I don't play that way, but you can develop it. But the technique itself of palm muting is exactly the same. We're still touching those strings with the heel of the palm, controlling how much we do it, and then muting the strings that we're playing with our thumb, with or without a pick. No difference there. Okay, we're all caught up. I'm going to take a little time out here, and hopefully Kathy's in the room. She emailed me a question about last week's lesson that I thought was a good one. She was diligently working on her scales, the melody notes underneath her G chord. And remember, the G scale had an F sharp in it, because in the key of G, all F's are sharp. Instead of an F natural, we're playing an F sharp. And it sounds pretty good because this is a G chord. Oh, let's palm mute that. But I mentioned last week, and maybe added some confusion, that if I'm playing a song in the key of C, well, G is a chord that shows up in the key of C. The key of C has no sharps or flats. So if I'm playing a C scale, now it's an F natural. But if I'm in the key of C and then I go to the G chord, we still use the C scale for the notes in the song. So in that case, under our G chord, we're going to play that F under the G. That actually makes it a G7 chord, but in this case, we're interested in that F as a melody note. So both are correct. If I'm in the key of G, I want that F sharp. If I'm in the key of C, but playing a G chord, then the F is right. So both are correct. It depends on which key you're in. Did that spawn any more questions?
We do have another finger picking related question here. This is from Studio. The chick portion feels a bit more natural with just the 2 fingers and no thumb. Is that common?
You could do that. Then what? It might feel more natural to do it that way. So basically, let me see if I can clarify your question for somebody that might not get it. I think I do. When we say boom chick, we're typically talking about this. Here's our boom, the downbeat where the thumb is playing alone, and then the chick is that in between beat, the beats 2 and 4. Boom chick, boom chick, boom chick. And I think the question that's being asked is, do I have to use the thumb at the same time I'm playing my fingers? You don't have to. It might feel more natural, and that's fine. I guess what I would say is that it's still going to sound different. This is a more full chord than this, and either is correct. You do whatever you need for the sound you're after. Since we're trying to learn to combine thumb patterns and fingers and muting, I suggest you start with both, or at least work on both, but you can always leave that out if it's right for the song you're playing. So many of these things that we're talking about as options or variables they're not necessarily right or wrong. It's more about being able to do what you need to hear. Okay, so there's lots of right answers here. What I'd like you to focus on for now, while this is new, is try to follow the basics that I'm showing you, and then you'll spend the rest of your life modifying them to play cooler songs than this.
That's about it for now. We do have a general question about picks.
Okay.
If you want to take that one
Sure.
real quick. Okay.
We've actually covered all the new material this week, so it's either questions and answers, or I'm going to review what I want you to work on this week. So the floor is open.
Okay.
Phil.
Phil Mitchell. I ordered the same picks, but got them in medium. Are you using the large
Medium.
ones?
I'll bet that means you got the orange ones. And I notice on most websites when you look at a picture of this particular Fred Kelly slick pick, it seems to me like most of the default icon pictures on the websites show the orange pick, and I'm pretty sure that that's the medium. If it fits you and it hangs on tight but doesn't make the end of your thumb turn blue, you're probably okay. It just so happens that the large is what fits me, and I like it. It's still on my thumb. It's still very tight. I can actually get away with what I'll call an unsupported upstroke, as long as I rotate my thumb, like we talked about earlier. If I'm not too aggressive, it'll stick and hang on, and that is probably what you want. So if the medium is hurting, it's way too tight, then you'll need the large.
He's saying in the chat room here, he got the yellow ones, but they seem to be too small.
Well, so as far as I'm aware, they don't make an extra large. Fred Kelly doesn't. But what you can do is run it in some hot tap water under the sink, get it good and hot, and then maybe you just want to pull it out. I don't know, maybe this much or exaggerate it a little bit, and then switch to cold water and cool it back off. You can certainly stretch these out, experiment with that a little bit, and see if you get a more comfortable fit. It won't hurt the pick any to do that. If you go too far, reverse the process and shrink it back up.
Okay, my bad maybe here. He's saying that they're yellow, but they are mediums.
Well, maybe they changed their color code since I bought them last, but if they're labeled mediums, that would be a surprise to me, but I suppose it's possible. But again, the hot cold water technique that I described will loosen them up. If you really do have mediums and you loosen them up, the only risk then is that by making the hole bigger, what I call the strap here might end up being too short, because you kind of want as much contact, full circle contact with your thumb as possible. You don't want this touching. You don't want the strap coming around and touching the picking portion per se. But if you get too big of a gap here, wearing too small of a pick, then I would worry that it's going to start slipping on you. But try that. Open it up a little bit in some hot water and see if that doesn't make it better. Maybe you have bigger thumbs than I do.
Got another one coming up here. Let me get it on the screen real quick. All right, I think this is a really good question. At this point in the course, what should we be able to do to meet a passing benchmark or good?
We're going to click a button, and the camera's going to reverse and show you in your pajamas playing for us right now, and I'm going to give you a grade after you play. That's an excellent question. And it really doesn't have an exact answer, okay? You're going to be your own best and worst critic on basically a self-guided study like this. Self-guided in the sense that we do this lesson live tonight, and then you've got 6 days of diligent 30 minutes a day practice all week to do by yourself. You can go back, obviously, and review any of the so far 4 lessons, and if there's one of them that you're still not comfortable with, spend some time there and clean it up. And the word I would look for is smooth. You don't have to be able to play this fast yet. That'll come with time. And in fact, we have a lesson coming up that we'll talk about how to do exactly that and do it well. But in terms of how good you should be able to play this stuff, you're going to know when you're comfortable with it. When you can play it smoothly, and your best example I can give is if you're working through a particular exercise and you're having to stop to think, okay, I just changed from the G chord with that root note on the sixth string. Now I'm changing to the C chord. Hope that changed my thumb pattern. If you're having to stop and take a look and then start playing again, that's an indicator to me that you should take some more time. That's just an example, but take some more time with something like that. If you're having to hesitate, even if you're playing it slowly, you've got a spot where you have to kind of stop and think, and that's normal, right? If this is new stuff, I expect that you have those. But just slow down, take some time with specifically the trouble spots, and go over and over just those for a few minutes until they again start to smooth out. Last week, I really threw you quite a lot of stuff. Yeah, if you weren't already familiar with your different scales, for example, you're going to have to stop and remember what that scale pattern is for the G chord, and then you got to remember what it is, what it was for the A chord, because it's a different scale. So if that's all new material to you, then it's understandable that you're going to have to slow down and spend time there. This palm muting thing, we talked about how you've got something here that you've got to learn to feel by listening to it and clean it up and get it to where it sounds right, and then make it work through your chord transitions and make it work while your fingers are going. So again, fingerstyle has a lot of different pieces. All I can tell you is trust me on this. If you take the baby steps, and that's why we're moving so slowly through this course, if you take these foundational baby steps and work through them, you will get to a point where your muscle memory and your fingers start to say, you just tell me what you want and we got this. And it'll start to become somewhat automatic. And that's all about repetitions. I don't expect that if you're up to today and you can't play everything perfectly up to today, that doesn't mean that you should be absent next week and not cover the new stuff. When we get through this 10 weeks, I hope that you'll take advantage of the fact that we've got an archived library of all of these lessons, and maybe you start from the beginning and run through them all again a little bit faster, but use that as your repetition drill. Repetition of all of these foundational techniques is not just a 1 week deal. We're just covering them 1 week at a time. You're going to definitely want to review and clean up things over and over again until they smooth out for you. Does that help?
Yes, that helps a lot. I have another question here. I think you may have covered this already, but maybe you could expand on it a little bit. And the question is about those high notes again, getting those to ring out. Maybe you could just briefly cover that one more time.
Yeah, we did cover it, but again, just keep this in mind. You can learn to control how loud your thumb is or how quiet your thumb is. And the simplest way to do that is by how far into the sound hole I'll call it dig in, right? If I run all the way into where my thumb is touching the string, I've got maximum depth on the pick. That's going to be a big sound. If I just barely brush that string with the very tip of the pick and soften up my thumb, that's a volume control knob that you have. The same is true of your fingers. And since they're the weaker digits, their inclination is going to be exactly what you described. It's a lot easier for your thumb to be loud than it is for your fingers to be loud. So you may have to train your fingers how to be louder. And at first when you do that, it's going to probably feel a little stiff. It won't be smooth, right? So again, that's part of the drill. 2 different volume knobs, how loud the thumb is and how loud the fingers are. And the fact that you can hear that, you can tell that's what's going on, is a good sign. That means you're listening to yourself. So now all you got to do is start to experiment your way through this and smooth it out. It's a lot of these things are touch, feel, experimentation, and repetition things, just like with where you put your palm down. You experiment with that a little bit. You'll find you have a lot of options there. You'll probably find a sweet spot that you like for most of the time. For me, that's like home position. Palm is just barely in front of the saddle and a pretty light touch. Things like that. All right, these are all part of the learning process. It's good that you heard that, though. Congratulations.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have for right now.
Okay.
If you have any more, make sure you type them in the chat. We'll get them logged. Take some more general questions probably towards the end.
Toward the end, yep. So what we'll do now, just real quickly, is review what I'd like you to practice this week during the time that you're focused on palm muting. Definitely go review the other things too, especially last week. But you can review last week by way of example, doing everything we did last week, only applying the palm muting. Do those scales, melody notes, and now, what was the rule? We just simply mute anything and only what the thumb is playing. Whether you're doing the 2-string bass or the 3-string bass. That palm mute is on the thumb, not on the melody notes. The example I gave you this week is just a simple chord. You could almost think of this as an accompaniment pattern, right? There's not a song in here, there's no melody to this, but it's getting you introduced to muting the thumb notes, okay? You can go back a week previous and review the picking patterns. That's not the pattern we used, but you know what I mean. Just look at the same tab that you had, play exactly the same things that we did on those weeks, and mute those bass notes. That might not seem like a lot of material, but I think if palm muting is new to you, you're going to find that there's a lot of experimentation and discovery to do here on where that sounds and feels right. And then the word of the week is smooth. Everything that we've done up till now, review it and try to make it smooth, okay? And that's your homework for the week. Any questions about that? Okay, then I think we're done.
Do you have one general question
One
that came
general
in,
question.
and this is completely unrelated to the material. And it is from Steve. As soon as I can get it here. Do you have any tips for making an E-flat chord?
I do, as a matter of fact. Avoid it if at all possible and let the piano player play it. Piano players seem to like E-flat a lot. I don't know why. E-flat is a bar chord typically. There's more than one E-flat, of course, but the one most people end up using is what we call a C-shaped bar chord. And by that I mean we're going to play the C, but we're going to use these 3 fingers, and then we're going to use the index finger to make a bar, a little capo if you will, at the 3rd fret. So if you play that bar there and then lay your C shape in with your remaining 3 fingers, that's our E-flat chord. And just to stay on topic here, that's an E-flat. That's the root note of this chord. So for our thumb, just like on the C chord, it is a C chord. It's just on a capo. Your thumb pattern is the same. There's your E-flat. Now, how to play that and not have your left arm explode. It's usually when it's a new chord to you or guitar is new to you, any bar chord has this challenge right here, right? It's a pain. It takes a lot of muscle strength. My thumb is pushing directly behind that bar, and in the case of this troublesome chord, I've got to stretch out with a finger in every one of those 4 frets. So we're kind of spread out, and where most people feel this, even me, is the gap between your pinky and right down here on the bar chord. That's a stretch that after a very short period of time begins to get uncomfortable. and because it's so spread out, it's just a hard chord to land on when you're coming from somewhere else, right? So let's take this slow. Let's get comfortable with this chord first, and then we'll talk about transitioning to this chord. And this principle applies on any bar chords. And this is a whole nother lesson. You get a freebie tonight. One of the things that I find happens when people are tackling difficult chords, especially bar chords, is their mind says, uh-oh, bar chord, this is going to be really hard. So your left hand says, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to try really hard. And that's almost the worst thing that can happen, because when you try really hard, you squeeze too hard and you get tired in about 3 seconds. So the first part of this tip is I want to try to get you to relax this hand, okay? Scratch that. The first thing I want to talk about is posture, okay? Posture has a lot to do with a bar chord. When you put that bar down, if you lay that finger flat across the 6 strings, perfectly flat, like you would play any other chord, you try to play those chords with your fingers going as straight in as possible. With a bar chord, if you lay that first finger down flat, guess what? That finger's not flat. We have a knuckle here, we have a knuckle here, and the finger tends to be a little bit curved. And laying that flat across 6 strings doesn't work so well. Typically, invariably, some string will lay right in one of those knuckles and won't get pushed down on as hard as the string that's right underneath the fat part of the finger. Does that make sense? So what we want to do, and I'm going to exaggerate this, but this is the principle that's going on here. When you put that bar down, and don't squeeze yet, by the way, do this with me, but only touch the strings for right now. We're not trying to press it down. Don't get tired yet. Thumb is right behind that bar. Look at my elbow down here. If you watch what happens, the farther out my elbow is, the flatter my finger is. If I bring that elbow into my rib cage, tuck it in underneath, that has the effect of slightly rolling this finger more off to the side. We get a little more bone over here, those gaps go away, and instead of having this, we get a flat capo, right? And that's what we want for the bar. And then you add your chord into it. Okay, so that's technique 1. Thumb behind the index finger, elbow tucked in so that we're back off a little bit to the side of our capo. Okay, that'll clean up a lot of buzzing that you might have in any bar chord. Now the one on the table here is this ugly C-shaped chord spreading halfway up the fretboard, right? Start with that bar, and again, with your elbow tucked in, only touch it. Now put your other fingers down where they go and only touch it. Okay, it's totally muted right now. Now what I want you to do is gently start to squeeze everything a little bit at a time until they all ring, and focus your mind on how little pressure this is actually taking. Probably a lot less than you would have thought. All right, then let go. Relax a second. Let's get that bar soft. Add those fingers in there, and then gently squeeze all of them. Okay? Now, that's tip 2. Tip number 3 is for those of you who are finding that this is still hurting, isn't flexible enough to get there, or it's laying down because it's too hard of a stretch and it's killing too many strings. Usually people, when they build a bar chord, when they're learning them, they start with the bar, like I just showed you, and then they add these other notes in, and then they try to play it. So we put them down in this order: finger 1, 2, 3, 4. If this is a stretching, flexibility, and strength problem, especially for your pinky, try this. Put your pinky down first, where it goes, then your ring finger, then your middle finger, and you're probably going to find that that's already quite a stretch. Spend a little time right there, get comfortable, and then add the bar. This is where the stretch will come in. So this doesn't work in flight at a not tempo song, right? But this is an exercise to get your hand ramped up to be able to handle this chord. So build it, try this, build it from the pinky first, and then add the other fingers. When you get to where you can do that fairly quickly, you've also just learned tip number 4, which is when you're transitioning, chord. Remember what we've talked about for 4 weeks now when you're playing fingerstyle. Whenever you transition to a new chord, the most important thing to hit first is that thumb on the downbeat, right? Which I told you was this E flat on the 5th string. That's the beginning of our thumb pattern. So if I'm coming from, what else might we be coming from? Maybe you're down here on a D minor, and then you got to get to that E flat. This makes no musical sense at all. It's just an example. I'm going from here or here, any other chord, and I'm about to slide up into what we call third position because I'm bringing the bar up to the 3rd fret. So we call this a third position chord. Well, when I'm coming from anywhere and I'm going here, my eyes go to the root note. They don't worry about the bar, they don't worry about the rest of the chord. I get that first, and while my thumb is playing that, I'm adding the rest of the finger. Let me do that again slow. I wish there was a better example. Usually it would be a B flat. Now slow motion. I'm playing some other chord. And on this downbeat, that's the first thing I want to hear. So watch my hands move at tempo. My right hand is going to keep going like a clock. First thing I got to hit is that root note. See that? I played and none of these fingers were down yet. That was my goal. That's my milepost. I got to get that first and then add the rest of that E flat chord. So that gives you some stretching exercises, how to get your hand strong enough to play that chord, and then some thoughts on transitioning to it. Land that root note first and then build the chord.
Okay, and since we're on bar chords,
Okay.
I had another question.
Way off topic today. That's all right.
This is from Martin, wondering, is it important to touch almost the fret when barring instead of putting your finger in the middle of the fret? And where do you apply pressure with the thumb exactly? He's struggling with that.
Is it important to touch almost the fret? I know what you're saying. So, yeah, when typically in a Guitar 101 book or another teacher, when they're talking about proper fretting techniques, they'll usually tell you, let's leave the bar chord out for just a second. If you look at this whole range right here is the first fret, right? That's my second string C note. I can put that finger down here and get a C note, or I can slide it all the way up to just about touching the fret and it's still the same note. This is why we're not violin players, because we have these things called frets to help us out. If you were a violin player, that would be the difference between a good and a bad note, right? The reason that's happening is because whenever you fret a note, all you're really doing is you're moving the nut up, right? You're becoming the new nut right there. So our lever, our pivot point is always at this first fret, no matter where in that space I play it. And the farther back I play, there's room here, a tendency, usually on the other bigger strings, there's a tendency for buzzing to happen. And generally the thought is the closer you play to that fret, the less chance you have of buzzing, and typically the less pressure it takes. If I'm playing back here, I got to push down really hard to make sure that ring's cleared here. But if I play up here, touching but not over the fret. If you start to play over the fret itself, then you start to lose tone and you start to have buzzing problems again. So generally it's considered the ideal place to play is just behind each one of your frets. So in the case of a bar chord, as I understood the question, is it important to still play close to the fret for the bar? Almost touch the fret. And yeah, I would say yes, it is. Now when your hands get stronger and you're playing faster, you may start to slough a little bit, and you can get away with that because your fingers are stronger. But If you're focusing on strict best technique, sure, go ahead and play that right close to, touching but not over the fret, both for the bar and all the other notes. Okay. And there was a second half to that question, Chris. What would,
It was about the thumb, the
or to
pressure.
apply
for
pressure with the thumb? Yeah. So generally, two things about your thumb. One is you want it almost directly behind your bar, right behind the index finger. And also, this is a good time to really pay attention to having the thumb down behind the fretboard. That's another part of the posture thing. Bring that elbow in, but also get that thumb down. The reason for that is the higher my thumb is, the more my hand curls up, and then it's a lot harder to keep all those fingers cleanly pointed into the frets. When I lower that thumb, it opens up my wrist and improves the angle. Yeah, thumb up. Now my fingers are laying down like I'm grabbing a baseball bat. If I bring that thumb down, it opens up the wrist, and the fingers now are going more perpendicular, if you will, into the fretboard, and you'll have a better chance of getting clear notes out here. Okay?
Great. Well, I think that concludes the bar chord section for now. But that was really great.
Yeah, that's fun stuff. Nothing wrong with that.
Back on topic a little bit here.
Okay?
From Canyon Hiker. For those of us who make the F chord by wrapping the thumb over the top, should we stick to the 6/4, 6/4 alternating bass, or add the extra finger for the A string?
You can, there's a couple of 60 ways to do this. What he's asking about is, instead of playing a full bar for the F chord, we're bringing this first finger down to only bar those two strings, playing this much of the F chord, and then our root note we're getting with the thumb over the top. Okay, not everybody can do that. Thumb over the top chords tend to be easier with your thumb over your middle finger, or, well, not really third. Like this, everybody's probably seen this. You're playing a D chord. Remember, our D chord, our bass notes are on strings 4, 3, 5, 3. And you can't play that open E over the top of that. It sounds awful. But you can, for something different, bring it over the top, F sharp. You may not want to use that as a root note, but it gives you an alternate bass note. That's not too hard to do. But getting that thumb over the top of your index finger is a little bit more of a stretch. And actually what I find, to talk about posture again real quickly, when I'm doing the thumb over the top where it needs to come over my first finger, let's see if I can get a camera angle for this, I tend to squeeze my palm. Now I'm breaking that other rule I just told you. I'll bring that palm up against the fret. That changes the angle of my hand to be more like this. Instead of directly behind the fret, it's over this way, and that makes this easier to do, and then lay those in, okay? But the question still stands. I've only got that thumb over the top for the root note. We've still got a horrible sounding fifth string here that we aren't doing anything with. So the question was, can I just bounce between the sixth and the fourth and leave that out? Yes, you could. If you still really want to hear the pure, you're probably, well, here's how Tommy would do it. He would lay his, Tommy Emanuel, would use his ring finger to play. If your finger is big enough and you develop that technique, you can actually fret two notes at once with one finger. I've never been able to do that very cleanly. But your options is to do just like we do on the C chord, you know, that our ring finger is bouncing. The problem here with that is it's on adjacent notes. So you're going to have to move it pretty quick. Or you bring the pinky in. But now we're hampered in that we don't have an available finger for melody notes. So if you're really in this kind of a predicament in a particular song arrangement, you're going to have to break some rules. And don't tell anybody this, but sometimes we fake it, right? Maybe all kinds of variations in there. I guess for purity's sake, if you don't need a melody note, use the pinky. If it's a low enough song, you could do this, or you can try the double pinch. Okay? Any of those three. I think if I were to honestly assess what I do when I'm playing that, even if I'm doing a 3-string this on everything else, the 3-string bass pattern, I think it's instinctive for me to just switch and bounce 6 and 4 and temporarily leave out that true 3-finger pattern. It's probably nobody's gonna shoot you for playing that way. And if you do it really fast, nobody will notice. Got more?
Yeah, we have one more here. See if I can understand this one here. Maybe you can help me a little bit if we can figure this out. Valley Boys, wondering about the week 3 lesson for the melody, how the fingers work. Maybe what the pattern on the fingers is. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure I completely understand the question. Let's start by asking, are you talking about the right hand picking fingers or the left hand fretting fingers? How do they work? See if we get a clarification.
Yeah, not sure. I was kind of assuming the right hand, but
Yeah, so on week 3 we had our thumb pattern going, and the thumb pattern doesn't change. And then we're adding, I'm starting with a G example again. We're trying to play one note at a time, the G scale underneath there, as if they were melody notes. So on the right hand, the thumb keeps going, and then we just pick one note at a time. And since it's so slow, it really doesn't matter which of the right hand fingers you use. I recommended that you start with your fingers generally spread out, each on the 3 highest strings. 3, 2, 1 on fingers on strings 1, 2, 3. Just have them sit there so they're ready to go. And if you want, you can play all of the melody notes on the G string, play those with your first finger. Play all the melody notes on the second stringer. Play all the melody notes here with the middle finger. And then you have a choice on the first string. You can either use your ring finger or your middle finger. You can shift down. That's not a real hard and fast rule. Whatever's the most comfortable for you. I recommend using at least 2 fingers on different strings. If you were asking about fingers on the left hand, what our goal was last week was to try to hold as much of the chord as we can, especially the bass notes, and then use our extra fingers to play that chord, or play the melody note underneath the chord, so that everything can keep going. Want our bass to keep going, and then we're adding melody notes in time underneath that. Maybe the big thing that might be confusing here is that sometimes we have to modify our traditional chord shape. Like on the C chord, I had to let go of a C chord note to play that first note in the scale, but that's okay because I'm not playing this note. I'm playing this note. So the idea is any notes that we're playing, move your fingers where they need to be right. Did you get any more clarification on that question, Chris?
A little bit here.
Okay.
It is on the right hand.
Okay.
And wondering about on the G, B, and E string. I think he's maybe just not quite catching what you're doing with which fingers you're using on the high E string.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I kind of touched on that, but let me just show you again. We're trying to pick all of the notes that we're using, we're trying to focus on the ones on these 3 strings. The thumb is generally staying on the lower 3 or 4 strings. The fingers are staying on the high 3 strings, right? So in the case of take the C scale again. Which fingers you use, you can alternate back and forth if you want. Or you can play only this finger on this string, only this finger on this string, and only this finger on this string. I find that a little bit obtuse, but it works to go like this. I said I was going to do the C scale. Here we go. So it's like this. I think if you were to analyze my normal method of playing, I do combinations of that. I use whichever finger is the most comfortable to use at a time, and here's what I think you would see me do. If I just wanted to play this the way I was the most comfortable, I would do it this way. Use that first finger on that string that it's already resting on. Use it again for this note. And then since the next note is on the second string and my second finger is already there, go ahead and use that. Use it again. But now watch this. I got one more note to play on this string. And then the next one is going to be on the first string. So what I'll do, you see what happened here? Right when I transitioned from the third string to the second, I had 2 different fingers to use. Okay, that's nice and comfortable. Do it again with that middle finger, but now I know I'm about to make a transition, so I'll slide my hand down, use that first finger on the second string, and the finger underneath it when I'm changing strings. Does that make sense? It's really easy when you're playing a note on one string and moving to another. It's nice to use a different finger for that instead of hopping over all over. You could do that, but since the ring finger is my least favorite finger to use, something this simple, I would probably only use 2 fingers and switch them down to play the melody note, okay? You can use, and I recommend while you're learning, use this one as much as possible, but now we've got a bunch of notes going up and coming back down. We've got a bunch of notes that are all on the same string right in a row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that's nice. 1. I'm going to use my first and second finger over and over again. Remember, I had the first finger here. Let's see. We ended on the D note on the second string. Got a nice little roll right there. And now for these 5 notes, I'm going to alternate back and forth. And guess what happens here? The last note on that string happened to fall on my middle finger, setting me up nicely to change strings with a different finger. Okay? Alternate your fingers whenever you possibly can, especially when you're changing strings. But then when you have multiple notes on the same string, experiment with changing. And again, this is something where there's really not a right or wrong finger to use. You'll probably learn pretty quickly which ones are the most comfortable for you. And a month from now, that's probably going to change and you're going to want to use different fingers. Okay, the exact right hand fingers that you're using right now is not quite as important as getting it smooth. So if you find a certain finger combination you use here is not smooth, then try changing it a little bit. Use different fingers on those notes and see if it helps.
Okay, we have a question from Chubb. And Chubb is wondering, will you be covering the melody notes and major scales for the B and F chords?
I haven't written out tablature for it, but I can cover that really quickly now. Let's deal with the F first because that's easy. If you've already got the E, what's an F chord? All it is a bar chord of the E-shaped chord. So that same scale pattern. Oops, excuse me. Oh, come on, Jim. That's a lot of pinky flying around. But it's the same intervals. Ah, come on, bar. Just like on E. Oh, come on, Jim. The difference you'll notice there is when I'm on the E chord, it's really nice to go down and get that with a ring finger for this spread. When you're on a bar chord, you have one less finger to work with, so your pinky has to do it all. Hard to do fast, but it's the same scale pattern because it's the same chord shape. The B is a little bit different character because the B that I was playing for you down here in our previous examples is actually a B7 chord. So let's see. Let's get this right here. The first note we can really deal with here is that A. It's right in our B7 chord. And we're really using the E scale again here because B7 is the 5 chord of the key of E, right? So we're thinking here in terms of the key of E. It's not a B scale, it's the E scale in the B7 chord, all right? So A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp. Okay, so that's how that works, and maybe you can kind of see why I left those out before. But I'm glad you asked because those are still first position chords. Key of E. Right there, I'm getting that melody. There's that C sharp in the B7 chord. Things like that. That's what we're going for, is being able to play this and get whatever the right melody note is for that part of the song, okay?
Okay, we have one more question from Kathy. She's wondering if you could play the C scale slowly.
Sure.
And tell us which fingers on the right hand.
What fingers I'm using?
Yeah, which fingers you're using on the right hand.
So here's real quickly. That's how much of the C scale we're focused on. So for right hand, again, starting with these 3 fingers resting here, there's multiple options here. I tend to, on something this simple and slow, I tend to move these fingers back and forth between those 2 strings. I personally wouldn't, at this point, use the ring finger. I'm going myself, but I'm going to recommend that you work on it. So the way I would play it would be this way. first finger for the G note, first finger again for the A, and then roll down to that second finger for the B, second finger again for the C. So it's like this. First finger, second finger again, and then I would use the first finger again to set up rolling, I would call it, to the first string with my middle finger. Let me call out the finger numbers here as I play. Maybe that'll help. 1, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Oh, excuse me, 2 again. 1, 1. I try to alternate fingers wherever possible when it makes sense. As an exercise, though, for training your ring finger, if you're playing super slow, just use the same finger on each string. In other words, first finger on the third string, second finger on the second string, third finger on the first string. What you're going to find is that's going to be a lot of workout for that ring finger. I wouldn't personally do that. That's easier to do, right? Roll back than this. So there's, again, not a right or wrong answer here. Experiment with several different combinations. You'll quickly find which one is the most comfortable. And I just blew it. I'm playing too slow. I can't do it the same way every time. You see how much it doesn't matter? I'm thinking about it too hard. You just hammer them over and over again if you're... Maybe you could try this as an experiment. Try a strict, this would be hard, but try a strict alternation on every melody note. Start with your first finger, second finger, first, second, first, second, first, second, first, second. See what I'm doing there? Every note gets a different finger, alternating between 1 and 2. It might help you to just work through the scale with fingers only. Leave the thumb out for a bit. Hold your C chord down though. Work out for yourself what fingers feel the best to you and then go from there. Okay?
Okay, I think that's going to do it.
Okay, we're out of time, out of gas. We'll do this again next week, next Monday night, same channel, same time. And I got more good stuff coming for you. Please do try to work on this. I recommend 15 to 30 minutes a day. And listen to yourself. I can tell by the questions I'm getting that a lot of you are paying attention to what's going on and bringing up questions because you're hearing something that you don't think is quite right. And that's good. Listening to yourself is important. Word of the week is smooth. And if you're playing something and it doesn't feel smooth, slow down to a slower tempo. Try it again until it is smooth and then speed up. And review other lessons too as we go along. Because this is a cumulative snowball. Everything we do each week tends to build on what we did the week before. All right, thanks for watching. And I hope you're enjoying this. Let me know how you're doing. You can email me anytime at jim@jimsguitar.com or come back next week with your questions. I'll be here. See you then.